Good afternoon and welcome to the International Science Symposium 2020 on the recent trends in science and technology, organized by Christ College Rajkot and sponsored by GSBTM and DST. Science is a part of everyone's everyday life. It is said that one must think and be like a proton, always positive. Today, we've gathered here to update and upgrade ourselves by the symbiosis of science and technology to make life worthwhile. A warm greetings of the day to the President of International Science Symposium 2020, to Your Excellency Bishop Jose Chittuparambil, Honorable Chief Guest Professor Nitin Pethani, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, distinguished keynote speaker Martin J. Blaser, MD, Director of the Center for Advanced Biotechnology and Medicine, New Jersey. Our esteemed guests of honor, Professor Girish Bhimani, Syndicate Member and Dean of Science, Saurashtra University, Dr. Mehul Rupani, Syndicate Member and other than Dean of Science, Saurashtra University, Patron of International Science Symposium 2022, Reverend Father Dr. Joman Thomina, Director, Christ Campus, Dr. KJ Thankachan, Principal, Christ Institute of Management, Ms. Nymphia Gogia, Principal, Christ Polytechnic Institute, Symposium Chair and Principal of Christ College Rajkot, Dr. Yvonne Fernandez, Symposium Convener, Dr. Shushmita Ganguly, Symposium Co-Convener, Mr. Sheris John, erudite members of the academia, respected faculty members, and the scholarly participants from the various parts of India and around the globe. I, Soni Zala, from the Department of English, Christ College, welcome you all with pride and pleasure to the International Science Symposium 2022 on recent trends in science and technology, organized by Christ College Rajkot and sponsored by GSBTM and DST. As we enter the third decade of the 21st century, we're struck by a sense of wonder and bewilderment, looking at the breakthroughs in the science and technology, keeping in mind the present pandemic situation. Science is a progressive medium for the development of mankind, as it makes our lives easy by harnessing technology for the collective good. Fundamentally, it shapes our lives through futuristic inventions, innovations, and discoveries, both at micro and macro level. The symposium today aims at an exposure to the latest developments in various fields of science and technology. It will serve a platform to interact with eminent scientists and subject experts, and will give career guidance to the subject selection for higher studies. It will be an opportunity to strengthen an interinstitutional collaboration and institute industry working. Prayer is a privilege to be enjoyed, a rare delight that is always revealing some new beauty. We commence our International Science Symposium 2022, organized by Christ College Rajkot in the traditional Indian classical style of offering our prayers to the Almighty, who is the source of strength, knowledge, and creativity. I invite Ms. Dhruvi Kotecha to perform a prayer dance. Thank you, Ms. Dhruvi, for the prayer dance reflecting the essence of Kathak, which is one of the Indian classical dance forms. In Indian tradition, light of the lamp brings auspiciousness, health, and prosperity to the environment, which destroys a moral negative power from the environment as well as the mind. On this online forum, let us virtually light the lamp with a symbol of enlightenment and a true knowledge that dispels ignorance, thereby liberating the seeker. I take this opportunity to request the principal of Christ College Rajkot, Dr. Yvonne Fernandez, who is also the Symposium Chair, to welcome the guests and the participants.
Audio was disconnected. Greetings of the day, President of the Symposium, His Excellency Bishop Jose Chittuparambal, Diocese of Rajkot. Chief guest, Professor Nitin Pethani, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Rutgers University. Keynote speaker, Professor Martin Blaser. Guests of honor, Professor G.C. Bhimani and Dr. Mehul Rupani. Campus Director and Patron of the Symposium, Reverend Father Dr. Joman Tamanna. Principals of colleges on a campus, Dr. K.J. Tankachin and Ms. Nymphia Gogya. Heads of various departments of Saurashtra universities, principals of various colleges, faculty members, distinguished guests, esteemed judges, the convener of the symposium, Dr. Shushmita Ganguly, co-convener, Mr. Sharis John, esteemed members on the staff of Christ College, delegates to the symposium, and my very dear students. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the International E-Science Symposium 2022 on the recent trends in science and technology, organized by Christ College Rajkot and sponsored by GSBTM and DST. Christ College epitomizes the quest for excellence and is known for spreading quality education to the youth. The college has always endeavored to provide a platform for a holistic development of the students. Affiliated to Saurashtra University and recognized by the UGC, the college offers bachelor courses in science, commerce, management, arts, and computer application, and a postgraduate program, MSc Microbiology. Under the Star College scheme by the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, Christ College is accorded the financial support for strengthening of life science and biotechnology education and training at the undergraduate level, along with ensuring that our students achieve academic excellence. The college organizes various activities that lead to all-round development of the students. For almost 2 decades now, the college has been organizing national and international conferences, workshops, and symposia that expose the students and faculty members to the latest global development. At this juncture, I take this opportunity to place on record my deepest gratitude to GSBTM and DST for the financial support in organizing this International E-Science Symposium 2022 on the recent trends in science and technology. It is a matter of immense pleasure to welcome the President of the Symposium, His Excellency, Bishop Jose Chittiparambil, the Bishop of the Diocese of Rajkot. On behalf of the entire Christ College family, I extend a hearty welcome to you, Your Excellency, and thank you for accepting our invitation and for gracing this function. Your presence among us, though virtually, is indeed inspiring and reassuring. A warm welcome to you, Your Excellency. I extend a very hearty welcome to our chief guest, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, Professor Nitin Paithani. Sir is known to be a versatile administrator, a dynamic, efficient, and visionary leader. Sir, your presence at our function indeed is very encouraging and motivating. We are honored by your consent to grace this function as the chief guest. A hearty welcome to you, sir. It's a pleasure to welcome the keynote speaker of the day, Professor Martin Blaser, who holds the Henry Rutgers Chair of the Human Microbiome at Rutgers University, where he also serves as Professor of Medicine and Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, and as the Director of the Center for Advanced Biotechnology and Medicine. He has many awards and honors to his credit. Professor Martin has also served as the advisor to many students, postdoctoral fellows, and junior faculty. Currently, he serves as the chair of the Presidential Advisory Council for combating antibiotic-resistant bacteria. We are extremely fortunate and privileged to have a scientist of eminence interacting with us today. A hearty welcome to you, sir. At this symposium, we also look forward to the interaction with Professor Liuben, scheduled for tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Professor Liuben, Provost Chair, is the Vice President, Research and Technology at the National University of Singapore and Head of the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. Professor Liuben is a leader in the field of organic functional materials. She was awarded the prestigious 2019 American Chemical Society Nano Lectureship Award. Recently, Professor Liuben was given the Centenary Prize for her work in the innovative design and synthesis of organic molecules and nanomaterials, as well as for excellence in communication at the National University of Singapore. She is passionate about nurturing the next generation research leaders and encouraging more women to pursue careers in science and engineering. Dear delegates, an interesting session to look forward to tomorrow morning. I extend a cordial welcome to our guests of honor, Professor G.C. Bhimani, Syndicate Member and Dean of the Faculty of Science of Rutgers University, and Dr. Mehul Rupani, Syndicate Member and other than Dean of the Faculty of Science of Rutgers University. It's a pleasure to welcome you, sirs, to this inaugural function. I also extend a wholehearted welcome to Reverend Father Dr. Joman Tomana, the Director of Christ Campus. We appreciate the involvement of a campus director 24/7 in the planning and execution of every event on our campus. A hearty welcome to you, Father. I also acknowledge the presence of the principals of other colleges on our campus, Dr. K.J. Tankachin, Principal, Christ Institute of Management, and Ms. Nymphia Gogia, Principal, Christ Polytechnic Institute. On behalf of the entire Christ family, I extend a warm welcome to you, sir and ma'am. I also take this opportunity to extend a cordial welcome to the heads of department and senior professors of Saurashtra University and other universities, principals and faculty members of various colleges, and the judges of various competitions to be organized during the symposium. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of the representatives from the press and electronic media and thank them for the coverage given to this event. I extend a cordial welcome to the convener of the symposium, Dr. Shushmita Ganguly, and the co-convener, Mr. Sharis John, who along with the entire organizing team have been working tirelessly to make this symposium a grand success. I would also like to extend a special welcome to all my dear and esteemed members on the staff of Christ College, delegates to the symposium, and my very dear students. In conclusion, I wish all the delegates a very fruitful interaction and every success in your deliberations and presentations. Once again, I cordially welcome you all to this International E-Science Symposium 2022, organized by Christ College Rajkot and sponsored by GSBTM and DST. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Reverend Father Dr. Joman Tomana is the Director of Christ Campus and the patron of International Science Symposium 2022, organized by Christ College Rajkot. I would like to invite Father for the directorial address.
The President of the Conference, Most Reverend Bishop Jose Chittuparambil, the Bishop of Rajkot Diocese and President of Christ College, the Chief Guest, Dr. Nitin Bethan, Honorable Vice Chancellor of our Saurashtra University, Guest of Honor, Professor Girish Bhimani, Dr. Mehul Rupani, and the keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Martin Blaser from USA. Our principal, Dr. Ivan Fernandez, the principals of Christ Campus, the convener of this Science Symposium, Dr. Shushmita Ganguly, co-convener, Mr. Sharis John, my dear faculty members, students, and delegates from across the world. Being part of this great event, it's my great pleasure to welcome you once again to the International Science Symposium on Recent Trends in Science and Technology, organized by Christ College Rajkot. It has been more than a decade that Christ College Rajkot organizes Science Symposium on recent trends in science and technology every year. The symposium one of the most awaited academic pursuits at national level, has gradually evolved into an international event since last many years. This symposium, I'm sure, will provide an excellent forum for exchanging information and discussion on wide variety of topics, focusing on the recent trends in science and technology. This year too, as it was last year, the symposium lasts for 2 days. Apart from the presentations by the delegates, eminent academicians from India and abroad address the budding scientists during these 2 days. And the keynote address, the plenary speeches, the planned academic competitions will provide ample opportunities for discussions, debate, exchange of ideas, and information among the participants. I'm looking forward to the exciting days of insightful presentations, discussions, and sharing of ideas by the delegates from around the world. I appreciate the entire organizing team and all the participants of the symposium for making it an unparalleled academic venture. God bless you.
Thank you, Father. The chief guest for International Science Symposium 2022 is Professor Nitin Pethani, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, Rajkot. Sir, we are honored to have you here with us. Professor Pethani has a doctoral degree in psychology, having a rich experience in serving various academic bodies holding prestigious positions and ranks. Sir has been the chief academic advisor in an internationally acclaimed research journal, as well as has been the member of high-profile committee formed by the instruction of Honorable Chief Minister of Gujarat. Sir is a recipient of many awards, accolades, and recognitions, one of which is the Best Educationist Award presented by the Awakening India for Modifying Society. Sir is a resource person who has undertaken several research projects, who has also participated in worthy conferences, seminars, and workshops. He's an expert in the expert panel in various academic institutions and has published a number of research papers and books related to disaster management and personality development. An aura who has taken numerous social responsibilities as well. He's a man with vision and a fountainhead of illuminating ideas. May I now invite our chief guest, Professor Nitin Pethani, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, for his speech.
Namaskar and good afternoon. Today it is my pleasure to be present at the inauguration ceremony of the International Science Symposium 2020. On behalf of Saurashtra University, I warmly welcome keynote speaker Professor Martin Blaser and plenary speaker Professor Lubin, other respected delegates, all the invited guests and all participants. This is the third international level science symposium organized by Christ College, Rajkot. Again in the online mode. Last year, the college conducted the first ever online symposium in keeping with norms of the COVID-19 pandemic. The college has been organized a national level science symposium annually since 2005. 5. The aims of this symposium is provide a platform science student to interact with eminent scientists in their field, keep abreast with the modern developments in science and technology, and also provide career guidance, well, including in them the required comparative aids in oral and poster presentation. This is an excellent opportunity for the science student. As the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, rightly said, education is not a problem. Education is an opportunity. This vision statement of Saurashtra universities to be at vanguard knowledge in the domain of higher learning and achieve the highest global standards. The mission statement include the achievement of excellence in teaching and research, the empowerment of learners in achieving their professional goal, and the strengthening of educational professional interface. To this end, the Internal Science Symposium organized by Christ College adheres to the vision and mission of the Saurashtra University. As Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, my message to the students in that technology and knowledge will be the key position, and also this will be the most sought after within the country and around the world. Therefore, it is our duty to help generate ideas which will benefit society. Educate and train people to work in the field where they will be valued for the specified knowledge. Also, my prime priority is to provide quality enhancement in education of international standard with local and national need offers by institution affiliated to Saurashtra University and facilitating intensive efforts and nurture good faculty. Thus, it is my great pleasure to be a part of this function in keeping with the tradition of inviting eminent scientists from various fields. The students this year will get an excellent opportunity to interact with Professor Martin Z. Blaser and Professor Lubin. Professor Blaser is world-renowned professor medicine and pathology and laboratory medicine who held with 28 US patents and has authored 600 articles. It will be informative to listen to the view of this eminent scholar in the current pandemic solution. Professor Lubin is an authority in many fields like organic function material, polymer chemistry, nanoscience and nanotechnology, biomedical research, environmental monitoring, energy devices, just to name a few. She is considered one of the world's most influential mind, the Pacific researcher, holds 30 patents, has 350 publications, and is among the top 1% highly cited researcher in material science. I will be privileged to attend the talk of this exceptional lady. I urge the student to make the most of this outstanding opportunity provided by Christ College. I end with the words of Albert Einstein, the great physicist. Education is not the learning of fact, but the training of the mind to the think. I wish the management and the students all the best for the smooth conduct of the program.
Thank you, sir. We were great to have you. Marjos Chittuparambil, CMI, is a visionary bishop of Rajkot Diocese. Since his first appointment, Father has worked hard for the development of poor and marginalized people. Father initiated many projects under his able guidance and developed Navjeevan Trust, making it a very popular NGO in the state of Gujarat. He was instrumental in starting many missionary centers of the Diocese of Rajkot, and as a diocesan director of social work, he successfully coordinated the relief program for the victims of devastating Gujarat earthquake in 2001. In 2008, Father was elected the Provincial Superior of CMI, St. Xavier's Province, Rajkot. During the time of his administration, the province made tremendous growth. While being the provincial, he was appointed the Bishop of Rajkot to succeed Bishop Gregory. Since then, Father has dedicated his life to the people, providing his services at various fronts, especially social and educational fronts. We are honored by your presence, Father. I warmly invite the President of International Science Symposium 2022, organized by Christ College, Most Reverend Bishop Jose Chittuparambil, for his presidential address.
Honorable Chief Guest of the Symposium, Dr. Nitin Petani, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, the guests of honor, Professor Girish Bhimani, Dean Faculty of Science, Saurashtra University, and Dr. Mekul Rupani, other than Dean Faculty of Science, Saurashtra University. The keynote speaker, Dr. Martin Blaser, the Director of CABM in New Jersey, USA. Campus Director, Reverend Father Dr. Jomon Thamana. Principal of the college, Dr. Yuan Fernandez. And the other principals in the campus, Dr. KJ Tangachan and Dr. Nivya Gogia. The convener, Dr. Sushmita Ganguly, and co-convener, Mr. Sharis Jong. Dear faculty members, students, and delegates from across the world, a very pleasant good evening to all of you. I'm very much delighted and feel highly obliged and privileged to be part of the International Science Symposium on recent trends in science and technology. It is organized by Christ College, Rajkot. It is a proven fact that Christ College always wanted to up the bar when education matters, and organizing a science symposium at international level when the whole world is struggling to cope up with COVID-19 pandemic. The college again showcases its real mettle. Science and technology is the ultimate need of the hour that changes the overall perspective of human towards life. Over the centuries, there have been new interventions in the field of science and technology that help in modernizing, right from connecting with people to using digital products. Everything involves science and technology. In other words, it has made life easy and simple. Moreover, humans now have to live a simple life. There is modern equipment explored by technical experts to find something new for the future. Science and technology have now expanded their wings to medical, education, manufacturing, and other areas. Moreover, they are not limited to cities, but also to rural areas for educational purposes. Every day, new technologies keep coming, making life easier and more comfortable. It goes without saying that the economic growth of a country also depends on the growth of science and technology. According to the recent data, our country, India, has the third largest scientific workforce in the world. India is progressively developing in the field of science and technology. The Indian Space Research Organization has launched its own satellites. After independence, India launched a number of satellites in the space by its own efforts. It is history that India has proved its power in the field of science and technology by launching Mangalyaan on Mars. Dear friends, in the present age, compartmentalization of subjects has become very difficult. And the theme of the symposium suggests the demands of the modern scientific age and how one branch of science should recognize the other branches of it to work together. Symposium of this kind would bring together the renowned and young budding scientists from far and wide to generate innovative ideas of science and technology. Heartily welcoming the dignitaries and delegates from across the world, I would like to congratulate the entire team of Christ College, headed by its director, Father Dr. Joman Thomana, the principal, Dr. Ivan Fernandez, convener, Dr. Sushmita Ganguly, and co-convener, Mr. Sharis John, and all the faculty members involved in organizing this International Science Symposium. I am sure this symposium will be an encouraging effort to help the teachers, researchers, and students of science and technology in furthering the interest in development of modern trends in science and technology. I wish every one of you an enlightening and fruitful time and invoke God's blessing for a bright future. With these words, I remain. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. I invite Dr. Shushmita Ganguly, convener of the International Science Symposium 2022, organized by Christ College, to give the vote of thanks.
Gratitude is the inward feeling of kindness received. Thankfulness is the natural impulse to express that feeling. Thanksgiving is the following of that impulse, rightly quoted by Henry Rutgers. It gives me immense pleasure to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Christ College, Rajkot, as the convener of International Science Symposium 2022 to August gathering for same organized by Christ College, Rajkot and sponsored by GSBTM and DST. Christ College has set benchmark for providing platform to budding and aspiring scientists to present work on the recent innovations and discoveries through international or national symposium. It also further facilitates interaction with renowned scientists and academicians in the respective field. We are deeply grateful to His Excellency, Most Reverend Bishop Jose Chittuparambil, for presiding over inaugural function and for enlightening presidential address. You have been our pillar, guiding and motivating force in every step of growth. Thank you for always showering blessings on us, which has been our protection force in difficult times of pandemic. Thank you for sharing your vision and novel ideas we surely implement in our life. I would like to convey deep regards and hearty thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nitin Kumar Petani, for gracing the inaugural ceremony and sharing with us his visions for science. We thank you for always trusting us. I extend warm wishes and gratitude towards our guest of honor, Professor Girish Bhimani, Dean, Faculty of Science. Sir, you have been our well-wisher since inception of our college, and you always believed in the quality delivered by Christ College. I would also like to express sincere thanks to guest of honor, Dr. Mehul Rupani, other than Dean, Faculty of Science, for gracing the inaugural function and sharing your vision. Pandemic in the form of COVID-19 has put all of us in the most challenging situation for the last 2 years, but we continued our journey with brave face. Same way, journey of Professor Martin Blaser holds the Henry Rutgers Chair of the Human Microbiome at Rutgers University, where he also serves as Professor of Medicine and Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, and as Director of the Center for Advanced Biotechnology and Medicines. Since more than 30 years actively involved in microbiology and clinical research. He has also been actively studying the relationship of the human microbiome with health and important diseases, including asthma, obesity, diabetes, and cancer. I thank keynote speaker, Professor Martin Blaser, for accepting our invitation and delivering keynote address on important area of research in spite of his busy schedule. Professor Liubin is a leader in the field of organic functional material, who has been well recognized for her contribution in polymer chemistry and application of organic nanomaterials for biomedical research, environmental monitoring, and energy devices. Professor Liubin, Provost Chair, was appointed Vice President at the National University of Singapore and Head of Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering, will deliver plenary talk tomorrow. My sincere gratitude to Professor for sparing her valuable time. I thank Dr. Anusurya Bhadalkar, Joint Director, HRD and GSBTM for sponsoring International Science Symposium 2022. They have always supported us every year and trusted our quality. I wish to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all presenters and delegates for sharing their important work and their findings and opinions today through International Science Symposium 2022. I thank all the invited judges and the faculty members who have come from far and wide to support and encourage the students. I even thank all the participants present in the inaugural function. No event or conference or function can take a shape without a hardworking visionary leader. It was the dedication and passion of our leader and patron of the event, Reverend Father Dr. Joman Tamanna, Director of Christ Campus, which made this event a huge success. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to you, Father, for your critical observations, thinking, and continuous support during planning and preparation for Symposium. Most importantly, making sure that understanding and taking care of minute details and ensuring that quality is not being compromised. Thank you for being our mentor. Conducting the Symposium would have been impossible without the zealous effort of our principal, Dr. Yvonne Fernandez, who has been our pillar and mastermind for planning and execution of any event. Thank you, ma'am, for your continuous support, motivation, and promote access to you around clock makes process simpler, and we feel inspired and motivated. I thank all members of committees and subcommittees of International Science Symposium 2022 and esteemed colleagues. Without their untiring dedication, committed efforts, and cooperation, this day would have not been possible. I appreciate everyone's contribution from the bottom of my heart. We also thank the press and media for providing their kind support and covering the news of this event. I thank each and everyone for their presence in this function. The whole of science is nothing more than a refinement of everyday thinking, rightly said by the all-time great scientist and philosopher Albert Einstein. I'm sure it is a good platform for all delegates to interact with judges and participants through virtual mode. We look forward to an extremely productive 2-day scientific delegation through International Science Symposium 2022. I wish you all very good luck and entertaining days ahead. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Let's have some science moment now. The keynote speaker for the International Science Symposium, organized by Christ College, is Professor Martin J. Blaser, MD, Director of Center for Advanced Biotechnology and Medicine, New Jersey. Sir holds the Henry Rutgers Chair of the Human Microbiome at Rutgers University, where he also serves as a professor of medicine and pathology and laboratory medicine. Previously, he served as chair of the Department of Medicine at New York University. A physician and microbiologist, Dr. Blaser has been studying the relationships we have with our persistently colonizing bacteria. His work over 3 decades focused on Campylobacter species and Helicobacter pylori, which are also the model systems for understanding the interactions of residential bacteria with their hosts. Over the last 2 decades, Sir has also been actively studying the relationship of the human microbiome with the health and important diseases, including asthma, obesity, diabetes, and cancer. Dr. Blaser has served as advisor to many students, postdoctoral fellows, and junior faculties. He currently serves as a chair of the Presidential Advisory Council for combating antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Sir holds 28 US patents and has authored over 600 original articles. In 2015, Sir wrote Missing Microbes, a book targeted to general audiences, which now stands translated in 20 languages. Sir has many awards and honors in his credits. To name few, includes National Academy of Medicine, American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Oswald Every Award, Alexander Fleming Award, and Robert Koch Award. In addition to research, Sir has actively contributed as a chair and member of board to various capacity, like chair at the Board of Governors, American Academy of Microbiology, National Cancer Institute Counselors, National Cancer Institute Board for Clinical Research, and President of Infectious Diseases Society of America. Sir serves the larger humanity with quantum of knowledge and experience he has. We are glad to have one of the eminent world scientists amongst us. Let us make the note that Sir is joining us at 6 a.m. in the morning as per the American time zone. May I now request Professor Martin Blaser, keynote speaker for the International Science Symposium 2022, for his keynote address on consequences of antibiotics destabilized microbiome. The stage is all yours, sir.
Wonderful, wonderful. I wonder if I can share my screen. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Can you see my slide?
Yes,
can someone? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So thank you so much. Thank you very much for the honor of addressing your symposium. And I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me. I'd like to specifically thank Dr. Padma Ambalam, who has been in touch with me over these last year to try to make this happen. And now the moment has arrived. So I'm going to talk to you. And the title of my talk has changed a little. I wanted to make it clear. The double-edged sword of antibiotics. And during this talk, I hope to tell you exactly what that means. Okay. Now, let me just give you some background. Here, I'm showing three different scenes that are really terrible. And we might say, well, these are three catastrophes that are unrelated. But in fact, they all have one cause, and that is, in those cases, the cause is a tsunami. And so a tsunami is an event of nature that can, as we know, is very destructive and can cause all kinds of problems. Here's another slide. We see hurricane, drought, changes in the Arctic, desertification, more storms. What caused these? These are all different phenomena. They're happening all over the world, but we recognize that they have a single cause also, and that is climate change. It's a general ecological phenomenon that has various manifestations. And now, my last example, I'm going to show you 4 other seemingly unrelated events: a volcano erupting, an earthquake, the formation of a mountain range, and an archipelago of islands. What caused these to happen? Well, we now know that this is because of the shifting of continents, of continental drift or plate tectonics. That one cause underlies all of the events that I'm showing here. So now I want to show something in human medicine. All of us know that many diseases have increased in recent decades. For example, asthma has gone through the roof. Juvenile or type 1 diabetes is doubling every 25 years wherever people are looking. Diseases of the esophagus, shown here in the United States, are increasing dramatically. And to that, we could add obesity and diabetes and inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, food allergies, atopic dermatitis, attention disorder, deficit disorder, autism. Now, if we have 10 events that are happening more or less at the same time, do they have 10 different causes? Or perhaps, like the natural events that I told you about, there's one cause that underlies them all. And I'm going to discuss that today. Now, let me just show you a little about obesity, which I know is becoming a problem in India as well. Here are data from the United States. Obesity trends in US adults, we could think of it as a form of changing physiology. In 1989, there was no state in the United States where more than 14% of adults were obese. By 2010, there is no state with less than 20% obesity, and the national average is about 30%. Now, what's remarkable here is that it's happening everywhere, all over the country, and the distance between the first map and the last map is only 21 years. Something very powerful must be going on. This slide looks at obesity trends among children and adolescents in the US. This looks at data based on the NHANES series. These are national series over about a 35-year period. And we're looking at the percentage of children who are overweight. And you can see that even in the youngest age group, these numbers are going up. And this is indicative for what's happening in the United States. Obesity in childhood leads ultimately to obesity in adulthood, and even more so. Now, those are data from the US. What about the world? Well, here is a comparison of time trends of overweight and obese children around the world. Here we're looking at from 1990 to 2020, the percentage of children under 5 who are overweight and obese. And here we see the developed countries of the world. You see the way the trend has been going, about doubling over this 30-year period. And the rates in developing countries, like India, is lower. But if you look at what the rates are now, they're actually very similar to the rates in developed countries 30 years earlier. So this is consistent with the idea that the same thing is happening in the developing countries, but it is lagging behind the developed countries by 20 to 30 years. These are the rates of obesity. But let's look at the numbers of overweight and obese children in the world by locale. Here's the global number of obese children in 2020. It's about 60 million. And in fact, most of the obese children in the world are in the developing countries, because that's where most of the children are. So you can see that this is not just a US problem. This is a pandemic. It is a slow pandemic. It's not like the pandemic of coronavirus, but it is a pandemic nevertheless. Now, I found this recent study of obesity trends in children under 5 years old in India, comparing two time periods. In yellow, overweight children under 5 in 2015, and in blue, overweight children under 5 in 2019. And you can see that in almost every state in India, the rates have gone up, in some cases dramatically. This is only 5 years apart. And this is, again, indicative of the worldwide trend that obesity is rapidly rising. So the question is, what is causing this? And the substance of my talk today will be to talk about the human microbiome and its role. So let me just give you some background. we humans are colonized by microbes. The microbial cells outnumber the human cells. They are highly diverse. They live in specific niches that the microbes in the gut are different than the microbes on your ear and in your mouth. The general pattern is similar across everyone, but the specifics indicate that everyone is unique. The microbes that colonize us generally are persistent, and long-term persistent for decades or for life is common. And it's become very clear that human biology is based on the partnership between us and our microbiome. So the question I pose today is, could changes in the human microbiome be underlying the current plagues of disease that I have told you about, in a way similar to climate change? So let's begin at the beginning. This slide examines predominant taxa in the intestine in the first 2 years of life. This is work that Nick Boklich did when he was a postdoctoral fellow in my lab in New York. Here we're looking at taxa in the first 2 years of life, and we're looking at the relative abundance of these taxa. The names are not particularly important here, but the colors are important. And we can see that we begin life with the dominance of these purple bacteria, which are the proteobacteria like E. coli. And then we get then these go down and we get these new bacteria coming in. These are the bifidobacteria and the Bacteroides and the Clostridia and the Fecalibacteria. There is a very orderly succession in how these microbial populations develop in the young child. And if you look at children anywhere in the world, you will see exactly the same pattern. This is indicative of the normal development of the microbiome. So how do children get their microbes? Well, it turns out that mothers are very important. Since the beginning of time, mothers have been transferring their microbes to their babies. We are mammals. We begin life in the womb, and we are essentially free of bacteria until the water breaks and the baby descends through the birth canal. The baby is covered by the mom's microbes. The baby swallows the mom's microbes. Now there's skin-to-skin contact with the baby and mother. The baby's mouth, full of microbes, inoculates the breast. And now microbes and substrate go in to the neck, to the GI tract. Mothers are kissing babies, they're licking babies, they're pre-masticating food. Lots of redundant pathways for transferring the microbes from one generation to the other. This is how it's always happened in humans and, in fact, in all mammals. So we're going back 100 million years. But these days, things are different. The modern mother is exposed to antiseptics. She's exposed to antibiotics. There are antibacterials in her diet. And babies are different too. Babies may miss the trip through the birth canal and be born by cesarean section. In the United States, 1 baby out of 3 is born by cesarean section. In some countries, it's more than 50% of babies are born by cesarean section. They are missing that trip through the birth canal. Babies are bathed extensively. They're given formula, which only superficially resembles human breast milk. And they get lots of medications, especially antibiotics, which I'm going to be focusing on. So on this basis, over the last 20 years, I've developed an idea which I call the theory of the disappearing microbiota. And this theory has 2 major tenets. The first is that changed human ecology has altered the transmission and maintenance of ancestral microbes, which affects the composition of the microbiota. The second is that the microbes, both good and bad, usually acquired early in life, are especially important, since they affect a developmentally critical stage. And I'm going to be showing evidence that supports this theory. Now, about 12 years ago, Dr. Stan Falco and I expanded this idea. And it's shown here, the effect of maternal status on the resident microbiota of the next generation. Our idea is that ancient mothers completely transferred a normal microbiome to their babies. But if they lost microbes during their life and their early life, and they couldn't get them back horizontally, then the next generation would be born at a deficit, and so on and so forth. And this is our conception of what's been happening over the course of the 20th century and now into the 21st century. Each generation is being born at a lower place. We are losing our microbial diversity that children are inheriting from their mothers. Unfortunately, there's more and more evidence that this is correct. Here, I'll show you one example. Here, we're looking at the prevalence of Helicobacter pylori in 3 generations of Japanese families. Until recently, Helicobacter pylori was the dominant organism in the human gastric microbiome. And here you can see in grandmothers, mothers, and children, the same kind of step down that we had anticipated. That's looking at a single organism. What if we look at the overall contents of the intestine? And so we can look at that using a metric called alpha diversity. So here's the alpha diversity of the intestinal microbiota in 4 populations. This was work led by Jose Clemente with Maria Gloria Dominguez that we participated in. Here's the total diversity in children in the US. Here are children in Africa and in Latin America. And here is a group of uncontacted Amerindians who, on their first contact with modern medicine, they have the greatest diversity. The village children are intermediate, and the people in the industrialized country, like the US, are the lowest. It's consistent with the same kind of step down that we've been talking about. And there are further, this was the first, but there are further studies that are showing exactly the same pattern. So our microbiome is disappearing. So what may be causing it? In fact, there are many trends, and I'm only going to focus on one today, and that's antibiotics. We know antibiotics is one of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century. Here's Alexander Fleming reenacting the discovery of penicillin. Antibiotics have been in the medical practice since the late 1940s. They have saved innumerable lives. They have revolutionized every aspect of medicine. That's why we think of antibiotics as a sword. But doctors and health practitioners are using antibiotics more and more and more. How much more? Here's some indication of the scale of antibiotic exposures. Worldwide, a recent estimate was 73 billion antibiotic doses worldwide yearly in humans. That's more than 10 antibiotic pills for every man, woman, and child on Earth, and the numbers are going up. In the US, the CDC has counted 258 million courses in 2010. That's 833 courses per 1,000 populations. That's 5 courses of antibiotics for every 6 people year after year. Based on the CDC data, by the time children are 2 in the US, they're getting about 3 courses of antibiotics. By the time they're 10, they get about 10 courses of antibiotics. In the US, about more than 50% of women are exposed to antibiotics through treatment or prophylaxis during pregnancy, just before the intergenerational handoff. And antibiotics are widely used on the farm, but we don't know how much of that gets to humans. So that we don't even know the magnitude of this problem. Now, everywhere that scientists have looked at antibiotic use, they find tremendous variation in antibiotic prescribing. This slide looks at the variation in per capita antibiotic prescribing in 31 European countries, looking at 2 metrics. And from the country that prescribes the least in Europe, which is the Netherlands, to that prescribes the most, which is Greece, there's more than a 3-fold difference in the rate of antibiotic prescribing. There is not a big difference in the rate of serious bacterial infections. This reflects differences in practice and in culture. Now, here are data from children in developing countries. This slide looks at antibiotic use in the first 2 years of life among children in the MALED birth cohorts. These are birth cohorts established by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations in 8 developing countries. And here we're looking at a time scale. The x-axis is age in months, the first 2 years. The y-axis is antibiotic courses per person year. This blue line is a line that I drew in. This is the annual rate of antibiotic use in children in the US. And what you can see is that of these 8 countries, in 6 of them, the use is higher than the use in the US, including these 2 sites in Pakistan and Bangladesh, where the average number of courses of antibiotics in the first year of life exceeds 10. And you might say, well, how is that possible? How could children be getting that many courses of antibiotics? But these children have fevers, they cough, they have ear problems. Their parents love them. They go to a nearby pharmacist who's very happy to sell them an antibiotic. This is going on all over the world. And I'm sure it's going on very widely in India as well. So we're concerned about the ecological effects of antibiotic exposures. And here I draw it like the proverbial iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is antibiotic resistance. We've known about that for a long time as a consequence of using antibiotics. But I believe that the body of the iceberg, the bigger mass of the iceberg, is what antibiotics are doing to our microbiome, disrupting it, leading to clinical consequences. The disruptions could be transient or long-term. The effects could be developmental, situational, senescent, or generational. And the kinds of consequences could be immunologic, metabolic, neoplastic, or maternal. I'm going to show you some examples of this in my remaining time. So first, I want to show you evidence of whether there is a correlation of early life antibiotic exposure and subsequent disease risk. So here I'm showing the design of a study that we did with colleagues at the Mayo Clinic in Olmsted County to study the association of antibiotics with early life antibiotic exposure with health outcomes. In total, in Olmsted County, over a 13-year period, there were 18,000 children born. We studied 14,000. And we were particularly interested in looking at a period of antibiotic exposure until children were 2 versus health outcomes after 2. In total, there were more than 10,000 children who received an antibiotic, 4,000 who were not exposed. They got the common antibiotics that are used. So here we're going to look at one of the results. Here's a Kaplan-Meier plot of the time to developing asthma in children by sex and by antibiotic exposure. The x-axis is the age in the first 2 years, the age, and we begin at age 2 after the antibiotic exposure up to the age of 14. And here's the probability of asthma on the y-axis. The red lines are girls, the blue lines are boys. The solid red line are girls who did not receive antibiotics in the first 2 years, and this is their rate of asthma. And in the girls who did, this is their rate of asthma. It's about double. Here are boys, no antibiotics. Here are boys with antibiotics. Also, the rate is close to double. So this provides graphical evidence that the early exposure is associated with increased risk of asthma, of developing asthma over the next 12 years. In fact, we looked at associations between antibiotic exposures in the first 2 years of life and risks of 10 common health conditions with childhood onset. These include allergic conditions like asthma, food allergy, celiac disease, metabolic conditions like overweight and obesity, and neurodevelopmental conditions like attention deficit disorder, autism, and learning disability. Now here on the right side, are the adjusted hazard ratios for antibiotic exposure in the first 2 years. A hazard ratio of 1 is neutral. Antibiotics have no association. But in fact, for all 10 conditions, the hazard ratio is greater than 1. And for 8 of the 10 conditions, the differences are statistically significant. So this is consistent with the idea that antibiotics early in life are associated with a greater risk of health outcomes. We also showed there were specific associations with number of antibiotic courses, timing of exposure, and antibiotic class. Now, those data are epidemiologic. They are correlational. Correlation does not indicate cause. It is consistent with cause. But now I'm going to show you evidence that antibiotics have causal roles. We have known for the last 70 years that antibiotics can be used in farm animals to promote their growth. Farmers all over the world are using antibiotics. They work in chickens to cows. That's a wide swath of vertebrate evolution. The antibiotics that work are antibacterials, regardless of their chemical structure, their class, their target, or their spectrum. Antifungals do not work, antivirals do not work, specifically antibacterials. Very importantly, the earlier in life that farmers start antibiotics, the bigger the effect on growth rate, the bigger the effect on feed efficiency, the conversion of food calories into body mass. That's what farmers are trying to do. They're trying to raise their animals earlier. So this suggested to us a developmental phenomenon. And we then began studies in mice, in which we would give mice an antibiotic or not. We would examine the properties, we would analyze the microbiome, and we'd look for a relationship. And now I'm going to show you the results of some of the studies. We've done many studies. I'm just going to show you a few key studies. Our first study was led by Dr. Il-Sung Cho when he was a postdoctoral fellow in my lab. Il-Sung gave mice 4 different antibiotic regimens at the midpoint of the FDA-approved level on the farm, or no antibiotics. And here we're measuring percent body fat. The mice that received antibiotics put on more body fat than the control mice. You can see it in this kind of example. This was our first evidence that antibiotics were changing the metabolism of mice. Next, in this study, we looked at the liver. Here's a map of differentially regulated genes in the liver involved in lipogenesis, in the production of fat. Here's a heat map of genes involved in fatty acid metabolism, lipid metabolic processes in control mice or mice that receive subtherapeutic antibiotics just like on the farm. And blue means underexpressed, red is relatively overexpressed. You can see the mice that received antibiotics have overexpression of virtually all the genes involved in these 2 processes. These are genes involved in central carbohydrate metabolism, lipogenesis, and lipid transport out to the periphery. The Il-Sung study showed many other things, but I'm going to move to the next study. And this was a study done by Laurie Cox when she was a graduate student in my lab. One of the questions that Laurie asked is whether the changes that we see in the bodies of the mice are durable if antibiotic exposure is only limited. So in addition to mice that received no antibiotics or lifelong antibiotics, 28 weeks, we had mice that received only 8 weeks of antibiotics or only 4 weeks of antibiotics. Here's the effects on morphometry in this experiment. We're looking at total mass, lean mass, and fat mass. The black line is the control group. What we found is that all 3 mice in all 3 antibiotic groups had increased total mass, increased lean mass, and increased fat mass. So 4 weeks beginning early in life was sufficient for the full effect. When we gave 4 weeks of antibiotics a little later, we saw an effect, but it was much smaller. This early life was the key period. So now the question is, what's going on with the microbiome? So here we're going to look at the community structure of the microbiome in the feces, and when the mice are 3 weeks old. And at 3 weeks, essentially there are only two groups of mice: control mice, no antibiotics. All three groups of mice receiving antibiotics are still receiving them at 3 weeks. Here on the left is a principal coordinates analysis looking at the composition of the microbiota. Each black circle is a control mouse. Each orange circle is a mouse that received antibiotics. You can see that there's a lot of diversity in their position of the controls and in those that received antibiotics. They largely overlap, but not completely. And that's not surprising. One group is receiving antibiotics, the other is not. Now we're going to go to 8 weeks. And at 8 weeks, there are actually three groups: control mice, never saw an antibiotic; mice that are continuing to get antibiotics; and one group of mice that got antibiotics for 4 weeks and then stopped. So here we're looking at the principal coordinates analysis at 8 weeks. Here are the controls in black. Here's the group with antibiotics. They're more shifted than they were before, and not surprising, they're continuing to receive antibiotics. But the group that got antibiotics only for 4 weeks and then stopped, their microbiota has normalized. So the effect of those 4 weeks of antibiotics on the microbiome was transient, but the effect on the phenotype was permanent. And this provides evidence that even a transient alteration in the early life microbiome can have long-term consequences. We wanted to see whether the microbe-induced obesity was transferable. So we gave mice antibiotics or not, and we harvested the microbiota from their cecum. And we gave these mixtures, these cecal contents, to germ-free mice. These are mice that were born in a bubble. They've never seen antibiotics. We gave these to mice, and we followed these mice for 5 weeks. These mice never received an antibiotic. Here we're looking at the body composition in these mice: total mass, lean mass, and fat mass. The black line is the control group. What we found is that the mice that received the antibiotic-perturbed microbiota, they put on more weight in total. There's no change in their lean, but there was an increase in their fat mass. So this experiment provides evidence that it's not a direct effect of the antibiotics, it's the effect of the antibiotics on the microbiome. The metabolic signal is in the microbiome. We were also interested in immunity. And here we're going to look at expressions of genes involved in intestinal defenses in the ileum of donor and recipient mice. First, on top, I'm going to show you the donor mice. We looked at genes related to Th17, the helper, the lymphocytes involved in intestinal homeostasis, and antimicrobial peptides downstream of Th17, control mice in black, mice that received antibiotics in orange. You can see expression of all these genes is down in the donor mice. We knew this from earlier experiments. This was exactly as we expected. But now we're going to ask, what happened to the mice in which we did the microbiome transfer? What would the pattern for these genes be? And in fact, we see the same pattern as in the donors. So the immunological effect is transferred by the microbiome. The microbiome has the signal. So now let me show you a second kind of problem, and this is type 2 diabetes. As I told you, type 2 diabetes is doubling every 20 or 25 years in US and Western countries. So Shusong Zhang did an experiment in NOD mice. These are mice that spontaneously develop type 1 diabetes. And in his experiment, he gave mice 3 different courses of antibiotics early in life, or no antibiotics, and then he tracked which mice would develop diabetes. And in another experiment, he just gave mice a single course of antibiotics or not and tracked diabetes. So here's the Kaplan-Meier analysis of type 1 diabetes in male mice. The blue line are the mice, is the development of diabetes in the mice that didn't receive antibiotics. Because they are NOD mice, they are developing diabetes. This is what we expected. But in the NOD mice that received antibiotics, they're developing diabetes earlier and more. And so this shows that the antibiotics are, by perturbing the microbiome, are accelerating diabetes and enhancing it. So Shusong went further. Here we're going to look at gene expression in the host. We're looking at the maturation of gene expression from day of life 12 to day of life 42. We know that some genes turn on during that time and some genes turn off. Here we're looking at the global allele gene expression patterns according to how old the mice were. And we can see that there's kind of a linear trend that gene expression is changing in a predictable manner in young mice. This is what we expect. But this was done by the nanostring encounter analysis, where we're looking at about 550 genes involved in immunity and inflammation. We know the results with each individual gene. In total, we found 5 different patterns of gene maturation. These were the genes that were in this Venn diagram. These are the genes that were that matured in the control mice. These are the genes that matured in the mice that received antibiotics. Some of them overlap, so they are resistant to the antibiotics. Some of them are only in the control group, so they were altered by antibiotics. And some were only matured in the antibiotic group, so there's a form of dysmaturation. As I said, we know what each of these genes are, and we can fit them into patterns. And here we're looking at an important pattern in innate immunity, the toll-like receptor signaling pathway. And this slide shows all the genes involved in toll-like receptors. And the genes that are shown in color are genes that are affected by antibiotics. And you can see it's pervasive in this pathway. And this is just one example of how the antibiotics affecting the microbiome are affecting the development in the host intestinal tissue. Now let me turn to a third problem, and that is asthma. And this is, first I'll show you work that we've done with Hans Bisgaard and Jacob Stockholm when he was a visiting postdoc in my lab. They have set up a cohort called COPSAC, which is a longitudinal deep clinical phenotyping of more than 700 children, some of whom starting during pregnancy and going through childhood, some of these children developed asthma and some did not. So here we are looking at the microbial compositions in the feces in a sub-cohort of more than 600 of these children. And these are, again, principal coordinate analyses. We took samples when the children were 1 week, 1 month, and 1 year old. When we looked at time of sampling, we could see that the early samples clearly distinguished from the later samples. When we did clustering by PAM cluster, we could see that the sequences form 2 distinct clusters, which we called PAM1 and PAM2. When we combined the PAM analysis and the sampling time analysis, we see that at the early time points, children are mostly in PAM cluster 1. There are some in 2. And then by 1 year, it flips. It's mostly 2, but there is some 1. So now we asked, what's the significance of being in one of these PAM clusters? So here we're looking at Kaplan-Meier estimates of the cumulative risk of asthma in the first 5 years of life, according to the PAM cluster, when the children are 1 year old. Turns out that this was the most predictive. If we look at all the children, those children born who continued to be in PAM cluster 1 they were almost 3 times as likely to develop asthma as those in PAM cluster 2. When we looked at the children whose mother did not have asthma, there's essentially no effect. But in the children whose mother had asthma, there's a huge effect. Being in PAM cluster 1, the odds ratio was 13. So this is being born, this is a good example of the combination of genes and environment. Being born from an asthmatic mother and having a microbiome that develops in PAM cluster 1 is associated with a huge increase in risk of asthma. Now, we have been studying the relative abundance of different organisms in the microbiota in the children who are 1 year old. And we have found many significant differences. And just here with asterisks, we find 3 taxa that have been found in several other studies as well. So we're honing in on what we think are the critical taxa that are affected, that make a difference with asthma. Now that's work in humans. And of course, in humans, you can show associations, but not cause. So we went back to the mouse. And now I'd like to show you work that Tim Borbet did. He's a graduate student, was a graduate student in my lab. This is in partnership with the Ann Mueller lab at the University of Zurich. Tim gave mice oral antibiotics very early in life, from day 5 to 9 of life. And he either gave azithromycin, a macrolide, or amoxicillin. These are 2 of the most widely used antibiotics in childhood, or no antibiotics. And then we followed the mice. We studied their microbiome, but importantly, we sensitized them with an allergen, what's called house dust mite antigen. This is an allergen often used in asthma studies. So we sensitize them, challenge them, and then we sacrifice them. And we were able to do immune profiling. So in one result of the study, we're going to look at the effect of the early life antibiotic exposures on pulmonary markers of allergy. So here we're looking at the bronchoalveolar lavage, the total number of cells. In the mice that got the house dust mite antigen, they have many more cells than in the control group. And of those, the mice that received antibiotics have more than the control. It's significant for azithromycin. When we look at the proportion of eosinophils, it's significant for azithromycin. Neutrophils, it's significant for amoxicillin. When we look at genes related to eosinophils, like eotaxin or IL-5 or IL-33, we see that all the expression of these in the lung is increased compared to the control group. When we look at IgE levels, we see that they're high in the azithromycin group, whether in the serum or the lung. These 2 both correlate well. And when we look at CD4 T cell populations in the lung tissue, and then we ex vivo stimulate them, we see that the cells that are producing IL-13 are increased with azithromycin. This goes along with eosinophils and allergic asthma. And neutrophils are increased in both groups. And this is associated with IL-17 as well. So we see important correlations here. So then Tim did a transfer experiment. Germ-free adults were given microbiota from the mice that had received antibiotics or not. So we gave antibiotic-perturbed microbiota or not to germ-free adults. And now the pregnant females gave birth to their pups. And we studied their pups, again, sensitizing and challenging them and examining what would happen. So here in the pups, we can see that there's an increase in serum IgE, total cells in the bronchoalveolar lavage, increased number of eosinophils. So we have recapitulated, again, many of the same things we found with the direct exposure to antibiotics, but the signal was in the antibiotic perturbed feces. The antibiotics are no longer present. It's just the feces that are perturbed. So these are all markers of allergy. But we did one further experiment. We conducted a methylcholine challenge trial to assess airway resistance and elastance. And methylcholine is used in human asthma studies and in animal studies, if one takes methacholine, it makes people wheeze. More methacholine, the more wheezing. So in the mice that didn't get the house dust mite antigen, when we gave them methacholine, we saw that there was more wheezing in those mice whose parents got the perturbed microbiota. We see the same kind of effect on airway resistance in the house dust mite antigen model. With airway elastance, we see similar kinds of trends. So in this model, we showed that the antibiotic exposure is associated with increased signs of allergy and increase in the asthmatic phenotypes. Recently, we've looked at the effect of antibiotics on the brain. In this experiment, we gave mice penicillin from birth, or we gave it to the moms before birth and then through birth, or not. We looked at the intestinal microbiome. We looked at gene development in the brain in two important areas for early life brain development, in the frontal cortex and the amygdala. We saw many changes. This was recently published, and you can see the details there. So we can see that antibiotics are affecting metabolic, immunological, and neurodevelopmental effects. Now, I want to close this area by just going back to inflammatory bowel disease. Worldwide, IBD has been going up over the last 150 years. It was first found in the Western world and going up dramatically. And now in developing countries, in the newly industrialized countries, including India, IBD is rising. We see the same events. Again, it's lagging behind what's in the West. And this is consistent with the environmental changes. So what might be causing it? Well, a study in Denmark looked at the likelihood of IBD in Danish children by early life antibiotic exposures. Here we're looking at number of courses of antibiotics in the first 2 years of life and a rate ratio. Here's the control group, no antibiotics in the first year of life. And the more antibiotics, the higher the risk of IBD. This suggests that antibiotics have something to do with IBD risk. So we next turned to an animal model. And we were interested in the question, can an antibiotic-altered microbiota affect IBD outcome in the next generation? So we studied conventional mice, wild-type mice, or mice that were IL-10 deficient. These are mice that spontaneously develop colitis. This work was done by Angel Schulfer when she was a graduate student in the lab. Angel gave antibiotic perturbed microbiota or normal microbiota to germ-free mice again. But in this case, the germ-free mice were pregnant. So she had two groups of mice, wild-type mice and IL-10 deficient mice. She had two inocula, perturbed or control. So she had 4 experimental groups. She conventionalized the mice. The mice then shortly after gave birth. And now we followed the pups out into middle age, up to week 21 of life. And we were concerned, what are the effects on the ecology of the microbiota from the antibiotic perturbed microbiota given it to the mother? And what were the effects on the disease? I'll just tell you that we saw many effects on ecology in the pups, but I'm going to focus, and you can read about that in the paper, I'm going to focus on the effects on disease. So this slide looks at colonic pathology in IL-10 knockout pups at week 21, according to the microbiota to which their mothers were exposed. So here's the colon of a mouse whose mother got the controlled microbiota. This colon is abnormal. This mouse has colitis, as we would expect in an IL-10 positive mouse at week 21 of life. But this is the colon in a mouse whose mother received the antibiotic perturbed microbiota. You can see there's a huge amount of inflammation. It's much greater than in the control. And this is representative. We can see across the whole group, there's about a 30-fold increase in the volume of inflammatory cells. So what does this experiment mean? Well, let me remind you that these pups never saw an antibiotic. Their mother never saw an antibiotic. All their mother saw was the antibiotic perturbed microbiota, which we gave them. So that means that the enhanced disease signal that we're seeing here is entirely microbial. That means that antibiotic effects can cross generations. And it also means that inheritance is more complicated than we thought. It's not just based on hosts and their genes, it's based on the microbes we carry and their genes as well. So let me summarize what I've said so far. I've shown evidence that antibiotics have long-term effects on host metabolism and immunity. The effects are due to perturbing the microbiome. There are other factors of modern life that also contribute, but I have not discussed these today. Effects may be transmitted to the next generation. And it's clear that we need to find and implement solutions because this is a problem on a very big scale. So let me finish with some more hopeful notes. How are we going to solve this problem? Well, one solution, in part, is that we have to curtail unnecessary use of antibiotics. And there is a tremendous amount of unnecessary use. The CDC estimates that 1 antibiotic course in 3 is unnecessary in the United States. My own estimate is about 1 in 2, about 50%. I don't know what the rate is in India. My guess is it's at least the same or higher. But even if we could curtail unnecessary use, how are we going to bring things back? The only way we're going to do it is if we begin to restore the microbiome. So now I want to show you an experiment where we've restored the microbiome. So I want to go back to the mouse model of NOD mice of type 1 diabetes. This is some recent work that Shusang Zhang did. And so if you remember, we were exposing mice to antibiotics or not early in life, and then examining whether they had developed type 1 diabetes. So he had mice that he gave antibiotics to or not. And then he had a third group of mice who he gave antibiotics to, but then he gave them the cecal contents from maternal mice. Mom cecal contents transferred after the antibiotic exposure. And then in all 3 groups, he looked at diabetes development. So here's the Kaplan-Meier plot. The blue line is the control group. This is a group that did not receive antibiotics, and this is their rate of getting diabetes, just very similar to what we saw in earlier studies. The group that got antibiotics had higher rates of diabetes, like as we saw before. And the group that got antibiotics and then got the maternal cecal contents, they are almost completely restored. They're almost back to baseline. So this provides a proof of principle that we can restore the phenotype after the antibiotic exposure. Shusang showed many things in this study. I'm just going to show you a few. Here we're looking at the characteristics of the microbiome. Here's the beta diversity. This is the group that received antibiotics. This is the control group. You can see they're quite distinct. The group that received antibiotics and then got the maternal contents, their microbiota shifted into an intermediate state. When we look at alpha diversity, here's the control group, here's the antibiotics, here's the antibiotics, and then cecal contents, again, a shift up toward normal. There's a partial restoration. We know some of the particular taxa that are involved. When we look at the metagenomics of the intestine, here we're looking at each symbol is one mouse, and this is in blue is the control group, in red is the antibiotic group, and here is the group that got antibiotics and was restored. Again, an intermediate phenotype. This is looking at the gene sequences in the intestine. Again, we know what they all are. We can arrange them into pathways, and we can make a heat map of their expression. And this is the group that received antibiotics. Here's the control group, and here's the group that received antibiotics but is restored. We can see for all these pathways that the restoration restored the gene expression in their microbiota to the control level. So we know what all of these are. These 4 pathways in the box, these are all related to lipid pathways. And in fact, when we look at 43 genes in these pathways related to beta oxidation of lipids. We see here's the control group, here's the antibiotic group, here's the restore. These are the eight most abundant genes. You can see how effectively the restoration has worked. And then when we look at the pattern of fatty acid oxidation, all the enzymes that are in the fatty acid oxidation pathway that are affected by the restoration are shown in color. And so, in fact, all of them have been restored. We can look at a specific aspect of fatty acid metabolism, diacylglycerol, and we can see here's the control, here's the antibiotic, here's the restoration. So we're on the road for restoration. And we're identifying the patterns. When we look at gene expression in the ileum, we see that there's a big difference between control and PAT, similar to what we found before. But compared to antibiotics versus restoration, we can see that there are many genes that are different in these volcano plots. Using RNA-seq, we can look at differential ileal gene expression in relation to the restoration. This is a heat map of gene expression. Here are all the genes, the thousands of genes explored. Each column is one mouse, and this is red means overexpressed, blue means underexpressed. Here's an unsupervised hierarchical clustering, and we find that the mice that received antibiotics, their gene expression in their ileum clusters by itself. Here are the control mice clustering distinctly from the antibiotics, but the mice that received antibiotics and then got restoration, their gene expression is clustering with the controls, not with the antibiotics. And we can pick out specific genes in which the gene expression has been reversed from the antibiotic pattern to the control pattern in both directions. So again, we know what all these genes are, and we can begin to understand the pathways. So in total, this kind of experiment is a pathway for discovery of microbes, microbial genes, metabolites, host genes that are perturbed by antibiotics, that drive autoimmunity, and that can be restored. So in conclusion, I've showed you evidence about diversity loss in the microbiome. And here I looked at three modeled locales. This blue line might be a country like the United States, where we're 7 generations into modernization. Red may be a country that modernized later, like India, but is catching up in a hurry. And yellow might be a country in Asia or Latin America or Africa that started to modernize much later. So this was my view in 2016. And the real question is, where are we going to be in 2050? Is the microbiome going to decline further? Are we going to be able to arrest the decline? Or are we going to reverse this through restorative steps? This is really up to the next generation, or maybe the next generation or two, to determine what this trajectory is going to be. So my view of medicine of the future is that doctors of the future will examine babies after they're born, and they'll examine the babies, and they'll examine the baby's diaper. And they will analyze, does this baby have the global microbes that all babies should have? Do they have the personal microbes that a baby of this particular genotype or biomarker should have? And if they don't, then the doctor of the future is going to give back those microbes. They're going to reach into their armamentarium and take those microbes and give them to the baby. And then we'll see, the doctors will try to reshape their microbiome so that they can optimize their health for the future. We give babies vaccines now. Soon we will be administering the microbes that they're missing once we understand the biology a little better. Where will we get those microbes from if the microbes are disappearing? Several years ago, a group of us developed the Microbiota Vault, a global nonprofit effort to conserve long-term health for humanity. We're setting up a process to save microbes before they disappear from peoples in the world that have not undergone industrialization. We've written about this in Science. This is under the leadership of Maria Gloria Dominguez Bello, and you can read about the Microbiota Vault if you go to our website. So finally, I just want to recognize again many of the people whose work I've talked about today. I've people in bold or people whose studies that I've showed very directly. Many other people helped in this effort. It was supported by grants from the US government and a number of different foundations. And if you want to learn more about this, I recommend my book, Missing Microbes. As was said, it's now translated into 20 languages. And this really will give you the big picture. And here, I'll stop here, and I'm very happy to answer your questions. Thank you for your attention. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yes, thank you, sir, for lucidly explaining the importance of microbiomes in our lives. We have few questions from the participants. I'll just take each question one by one. The first question is, what could be the reason for antibiotic treatment to induce more expression in lipogenesis genes? Sir, I repeat, what could be the reason for antibiotic treatment to induce more expression of lipogenesis genes?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's a good question. In those studies, we examined how efficient the altered microbiome was in extracting energy from food. We know, for example, if you eat an apple, you will extract most of the energy of that apple in your small intestine, and you will absorb that energy. But there's a certain amount of energy that is indigestible in the small intestine, and that will end up in your colon. And then the bacteria in the colon will ferment that what is remained, and that ordinarily provides 5 to 15% of our total energy, colonic fermentation. And what we found is that after the antibiotic perturbation, colonic fermentation was more efficient. We had changed the microbiome. The energy extraction was more efficient, so more energy was leaving the intestine, going to the portal circulation, going to the liver, and now inducing genes in the liver to handle that extra energy. That's our analysis of what was going on, and that's in our Nature paper from 2012.
Thank you, sir. Another question. So according to you, how can we cure bacterial vaginosis, which is a persistent disease in women?
Yeah. That question refers to bacterial vaginosis, and that is not an area I've worked on, so I can't tell you directly about that. I will say, of course, that is an ailment of adult women, and my focus really is on early life and childhood. I will tell you that a group in Israel has been doing experiments in women with bacterial vaginosis, giving them vaginal transplants. So they're transplanting vaginal microbiota from a healthy woman to a woman with bacterial vaginosis, and they've shown some preliminary data that looks promising, but all of us will have to keep up on that literature.
So the next question is, what can we do to replace antibiotics?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question. The first point that I want to make, and I make it again and again, is that many people, especially children, are receiving antibiotics that they do not need. So the first thing is that we have to cut down on the tremendous overuse of antibiotics. Doctors are using antibiotics as if there was no cost. There was no biological cost. Patients and families, they think antibiotics are miraculous because in some cases they are. And so we have to reassess the use of antibiotics. But there will always be people who need antibiotics. I'm not in any way advocating doing away with antibiotics, but just using them more wisely. So we need to develop narrow spectrum antibiotics. So if a child has a strep infection, then we should treat them with strepsillin. We should treat them with an antibiotic that just narrowly focused on that organism and will not have the collateral damage to the microbiome. Medical science has to develop those antibiotics. I don't think it will be difficult. We've seen what we can do. We've vaccinated billions of people now in the last 2 years. Our scientific reach is very good, but we have to have the will to do it. Right now, antibiotics are very inexpensive. And I think they're too inexpensive, which is one of the reasons that they're so widely abused. So we have to have a scientific campaign to develop narrow spectrum antibiotics and use them to replace the broad spectrum antibiotics. We will need better diagnostic tests in medicine also, so that we will know, is it a strep infection? Is it a staph infection? Is it an E. coli infection? But developing narrow spectrum I think will be a really important development for treatment of infectious diseases.
Well, thank you, sir, for answering the questions. Right now, the chat box is flooded with many questions. Though there are many questions, we stop here. But yes, a point worth noting that somehow we genuinely have neglected the fact that our present-day diseases are the consequences of the antibiotics that we use extensively. And on a serious note, we must understand that healthy microbiomes is a key to healthy life. So somehow microbiomes keeps us from heaven and hell. So on this note, I extend my gratitude that your presence here has marked somehow, being a part of a conference with an eminent scientist like you in front of us, explaining us so clearly the effects and the consequences. So we are really glad to have you. Earlier, we did try to contact you, but somehow due to the busy schedule, but we are lucky to have you with us this year. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you and your colleagues for your attention, and good luck to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So on this note, we end the inaugural ceremony and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.